the agenda that we have for the day. So before we get started, let me start by welcoming every one of you and maybe mentioning a few housekeeping. So first, we'll be recording the meeting. So kindly allow that we record the conversations. Secondly, I would ask that we write the questions or the comments that we'll be having in the chat box. Someone will be compiling that. Additionally, we'll be running a poll towards the end of the webinar. So I would request that everyone participates. And for you to do that, you will need to scan a QR code that will be shared. So you can use your phone to do that. We will also share a link that you can be able to click and access the poll that will be running. So at this point, I would like to welcome my colleague, Julius, who is going to give us the context and objectives of the webinar. Welcome, Julius.
Thank you, Mary. Good afternoon. My name is Julius Mutia. I work in climate change and sustainability sector at MSC, where I support climate finance, adaptation, and nature-based solutions across Africa. And I have worked with public sector, development partners, and financial service providers on carbon projects, adaptation planning, and natural capital initiatives. And it's a pleasure to moderate this conversation today. So a little bit about MSC. Microsafe is a global consulting firm that enables social, financial, and economic inclusion in emerging markets. And with over 25 years of experience across over 40 countries, MSC works with financial service providers, governments, donors, and private sector actors to design inclusive, scalable solutions that improve lives and livelihoods. And MSC is a trusted partner in climate finance, climate resilience, digital transformation, financial inclusion, and sustainable enterprise development. So a bit about today's webinar. So today's webinar is very timely, and carbon markets are expanding globally. And Africa has some of the strongest potential for both removal and avoidance projects. And yet institutions that are closest to last mile communities and MFIs, SACCOs, and cooperatives are not fully participating in these opportunities. Not because they lack relevance, but because of gaps in awareness, monitoring, reporting and verification systems, financing models, and policy clarity. And at the same time, these institutions are already financing climate positive activities every day. We all know that. And these activities include clean energy, agroforestry, irrigation technologies, land restoration, and nature-based enterprises. The question is not whether they have a role, but how to enable them participate meaningfully and benefit from carbon finance. This session brings together actors from microfinance, carbon project development, regulators, donors, and sustainability funds, together with fintechs, to unpack exactly that. Our aim is to clarify where institutions can plug in, what support is required, and how collaboration can turn potential into action. There are 4 key objectives for today's discussion. And to clarify, fundamentals of carbon finance and what they mean for microfinance institutions and SACCO clients. Again, we will be focusing on highlighting the emerging role, the emerging pilots and experiences from institutions already engaging in climate-aligned financing. And also, the other objective is to explore practical models for monetizing carbon assets through microfinance institutions and SACCO channels. And finally, we also seek to spotlight how organizations like MSC and other partners can support institutions to enter and grow within this space. By the end of this session, we hope you will walk away with a clearer understanding of both the opportunities and readiness pathway, including where partnerships, pilots, and technical support can make the biggest difference. And with that framing, I would like to invite Mary, who will introduce our incredible panelist. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you so much, Julius, for giving us the context and objectives of this webinar. So at this point, I would love to introduce our panelists. And before I do that, maybe I could also give some few insights. So what kind of customers do our MFIs serve? We know that a good number of them are smallholder farmers or the low-income households, the ones that have been using biomass for lighting, cooking, and therefore they contribute to the greenhouse gases. So what can we do to cut on these emissions and save their health and also save our environment for the women, girls, children, and the entire household and the low-income population? Again, we know that our MFIs and SACCOs are the vehicles that we can use to reach the last mile, to facilitate adoption of technologies like cook stoves, solar, biogas systems, solarized processing equipment, and so. Therefore, our MFIs and SACCOs offer social, they are after social impact. And they will not only give money to this clientele, but they would also want to partner with the technology providers. Therefore, our SACCOs and MFIs are better placed to support in this role, which also offers a very big opportunity when it comes to carbon markets. With that, allow me to just introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is our very own Mr. Charles Wawero, who is the Director of Carbon Project Development at Vast Carbon, where he leads the end-to-end design, structuring, and implementation of carbon credit projects across Africa. His work spans sectors such as clean cooking, biochar, agroforestry, e-mobility, and energy access under both voluntary and compliance market frameworks. Charles brings deep expertise in Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, digital MRV innovation, and climate finance structuring. He has also co-developed and delivered a series of carbon market training sessions, equipping African practitioners with tools to design high-integrity carbon projects that meet the global standards. Current flag project is under the development of the Ministry of Education. We have the NACONEC project in the institutional clean cooking, where he's supporting with transitioning schools from the use of biomass fuels to low carbon steam cooking technology. Mr. Wawero is also a governing council member of CAMAC, Carbon Market Association of Kenya, where he contributes to shaping the policy, institutional, and private sector landscape, supporting Kenya's national carbon market ecosystem. Outside his professional sphere, Charles enjoys Rumba. So colleagues, join me in welcoming Charles. Charles will be handling the topic, demystifying the carbon market. Our second presenter is going to be Vincent Mainga. He is a climate change and carbon programs expert with over 20 years of experience leading high impact initiatives across Africa. Vincent has strong expertise in voluntary carbon standards, both Vera and Gold standards, also Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, and sustainability frameworks across all the ESG standards, and also clean energy. Vincent work spans through across forestry, landscape restoration, sustainable agriculture, ESG, and natural capital accounting. He has successfully managed multi-thematic programs, donor funds, and teams from grassroots to regional and global levels. while also contributing to national restoration policies and frameworks. He held senior leadership roles across various organizations. He has a master's degree, bachelor in forestry, and also a master's degree in environmental planning and management. Vincent will be handling the topic, unlocking carbon finance in microfinance institutions through decarbonization strategies. Please please join me in welcoming Mr. Vincent Mainga. Our other panelist is Vikash Kumar Sinha. He is an associate partner and lead for the climate change and sustainability practice at MSc. He has over 18 years extensive experience. He specializes in natural resource management, climate smart agriculture, climate finance, nature-based solutions, carbon markets, and climate adaptation and resilience. He has successfully led projects across India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Fiji, Nepal, Indonesia, and across South and Southeast Asia region. So Vikash will be handling the topic, why MFIs and SACCOs matter in the carbon finance ecosystem and the role of MSc. So colleagues, join me in welcoming Vikash. And our last panelist is going to be Brian Omenyi. Brian Omenyi is the coordinator of the Power Up campaign here in Kenya, which is also under the Ashden based in the UK. Brian has worked in implementing quite a number of projects within the renewable energy space, and previously he was the coordinator of the Sustainable Energy Access Association of Kenya, and he has done a tremendous job in shaping the energy policy in Kenya, and now working within the renewable energy space, whereby he will be supporting us handling the topic opportunities of carbon finance within the renewable energy space. So please join me in welcoming all the panelists. So the moderators for the session is going to be Julius Mutia and I. So at this point, kindly allow me to welcome our first panelist, Charles, to share his presentation. Welcome very much, Charles. Waweru.
Thank you for that, Mary, and good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are. It's a pleasure to be part of this conversation today. I'm sure most of you have heard quite a bit on things to do with carbon markets, carbon credits. And for those who have not, fear not, because I'm going to take you through pretty steep but very simple explanation as to what carbon market and carbon credits are all about. Briefly, in terms of who we are as Vast Carbon, is we do quite a bit of work in the space. In principle, we support in a lot of carbon project development, that is end-to-end development of carbon projects across the different ecosystems as you can see on your screen. We also provide advisory services in the areas of carbon finance and carbon projects, and of course leverage a lot on our young brilliant team with areas of technology, climate technology. We have been able to ship out what we call a digital monitoring reporting verification tool that has been used in clean cooking, and of course currently looking at what else can you do in the areas of e-mobility. Also, we are happy to be supporting the government of Kenya, that is the Ministry of Environment, in building Kenya's national carbon registry. However, we came to quickly realize that in as much as we want to do all these things in carbon markets, we realize that there's a lot of gap, and therefore capacity building is one of the key things that we tend to do, just to make sure that we're able to equip the Africa community in matters to do with carbon markets, that therefore we're able to unlock carbon finance. In today's session, we're looking at demystifying carbon credits. So the first thing is what is the basis of carbon markets? Why do we even have this particular market in existence? So I will take you down a slight memory curve to remind you that once upon a time, we were doing a lot of agricultural activities You might remember this as the agrarian revolution. And of course, over time, we were able to start creating and designing machines that could take up that work. Over time, we started having a lot of industrializations occurring within the entire ecosystem, particularly within the global north. Now, whereas the industries were able to increase the Human Development Index, one of the unforeseen or unintended consequence was the emission of certain gases into the atmosphere on account of these industries. By then, we're talking about the 1700s, it was not noticed that these gases were posing significant threat. However, over time, about 100 years down the line, different scientists across the planet came to realize that there's increase in what we call the surface temperature, or if you like, global warming, and they began to investigate what really is causing all this increase in surface temperatures. If you all remember back in the early 90s, we had this documentary that was being led by the former US Vice President Al Gore, and they're really talking about the inconvenient truth that in as much as we're looking at industrializing the economies, there are these consequences. So over time, to realize that there are certain gases coming out from these industries, that when these gases spend too much time within the ecosystem, they tend to have this unique property of trapping the sun rays from escaping. As you can see on the screen, the sun rays also gives us the heat that makes the planet sustainable for human living. But the idea is that heat is supposed to be going back out into the outer space. But when these gases are trapping the heat a little bit too longer than necessary, then there's an increase of temperature within the ecosystem. For those of you who are into the agricultural space, think of it like when you're outside a cattle shed, and then you go into the cattle shed, you'll notice that besides the interesting smell, there's also a unique increase in the temperature within that cattle shed. The reason behind that temperature is because of the methane coming from this cattle. For those of you who have had the privilege of going into a sauna, similar thing. You leave the door to a sauna open, there is no more heat trapping, and therefore it's no longer as hot as you want. But if you close the door to a sauna, there's a kind of heat. That is a simple principle behind how we talk about global warming or even the climate change. Therefore, the scientists came together through the UNFCCC, that is the United Nations Framework for Climate Change, and say that there are different causes of global warming, but there's one cause within which we can try and mitigate. Keyword here is mitigate. So it then decided that it's important to provide a framework within which countries can come together and develop projects that are designed towards either avoiding, reducing, or removing these greenhouse gases, the principal agent that is causing the increase in surface temperatures by trapping these greenhouse gases. And therefore, we had this ecosystem being built by governments, in principle through the United Nations, that allowed governments to work towards developing such kind of projects. But of course, over time, the private sector said, hey, we also want to play a role in this. But in a nutshell, carbon markets' existence was in principle to provide an ecosystem whereby persons who are able to develop projects, climate mitigation projects designed towards avoiding, reducing, or removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, are able to trade the same commodity with those who are unable to do the same, but because of the different economic operations or business operations, they are emitting. And therefore, that is the underlying principle of carbon markets, how it came there and why we have it here. In a nutshell, when you're looking at removing 1 ton of greenhouse gases, or if you like, carbon dioxide equivalent, we talk about that as being 1 carbon credit. So for every ton of this greenhouse gas that is removed, it is equivalent to 1 carbon credit. That is a ratio of 1:1. When we talk about a market, of course, we talk about, think of it like a typical market in your neighborhood. There must be the buyers, there must be the sellers. So who are these people who are coming to buy these so-called carbon credits, and who are these people who are coming to sell the so-called carbon offsets? So for companies, especially those in the global north and some within the continent like South Africa, you'll find where in the ecosystem, the environmental regulatory authority requires them to make sure they're offsetting whatever they emit in the ecosystem. How does a company know the amount of carbon footprint they're leaving? They do a typical emissions calculation. In most cases, this is a calculation of the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, where it could be looking at the building, the transportation, and everything else, and they're able to quantify that, hey, in a particular given year, we are emitting about 1 million tons of greenhouse gases, and we need to offset this. Now, the different ways to offset. One way to offset is you can ask the company to go towards green. For example, if they're using generators for powering the building, that's considered using solar, for example. That is not what's called the incentive. However, sometimes that might be difficult. So the other option of either one, buying these so-called carbon credits to offset the emissions, or two, them participating in a project that is either reducing or removing these greenhouse gases. So for those who are not able to do either the insetting, or for those who are unable to do their own carbon mitigation project or climate mitigation project, then they have to come to what we call the carbon credit marketplace. Look for people who have been able to remove these greenhouse gases from the atmosphere in what we call the offset projects, and transact. For every 1 ton of greenhouse gas they want to remove, they have to buy 1 carbon credit first. So for this company that has been able to, that's looking towards offsetting 1 million tons of greenhouse gases, they simply have to buy 1 million carbon credits. They can choose credits coming from the agricultural sector, renewable energy, forestry, blue carbon technology sectors like the likes of direct air capture. There are over 107 different types of projects, and we'll be happy to share more on the same on this. But basically, in a nutshell, that is how the ecosystem comes about. Now, you remember I mentioned that and hope my screen is shared. Yes, it's been shared. Yes, you remember I mentioned at the beginning that at the very beginning, the principal parties that are responsible for climate mitigation were the governments through, of course, the United Nations. And from that initial setup, they came up with what's called the Kyoto Protocol. That was back in '97, that allowed countries to start looking at ways in which they can reduce or remove its greenhouse gases and transact amongst each other. So for the case of those within the global south, that is the bulk of Africa, we were part of what you call the Clean Development Mechanism, or if you like CDM, and it allows those in the global north to buy these so-called offsets or carbon credits from here in the global south. But of course, there are challenges within that. For example, the price is not making sense. Those in the global north also having their own ecosystem, the whole bunch of challenges. So over time, the intention or the vision of countries working towards combating climate change together is one global body was winning, and luckily the government said, let's go back, let's meet in Paris back in 2015, City of Love and Renew Our Love for Mother Nature, and we came up with the Paris Agreement that renewed the ambitions, and from that point onwards, we had countries developing what you're calling now the nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, if you like. And this one, it provided a clearer framework between two countries, how they can be able to support each other through the private sector. Now, speaking of private sector, you as a SACCO, you as a microfinance institution, or you as a smallholder farmer cooperative can also be part of this particular ecosystem through what you call the voluntary carbon markets. In this case here, there is no coercion, there is no mandatory need for you to fight climate change. It's just you doing it voluntarily, and you've got different ecosystem players that we'll be speaking about later in the presentation is as to how you, as somebody in the in a given circle within the continent, can be part of this ecosystem. And just to be clear, as I've mentioned, this ecosystem did not start this year or last year. It has been running all the way as far back as 1997. We're about 3 decades into the ecosystem, so it's never too late for anyone within this call to join. Now, you'll always keep on hearing a lot about carbon finance, or climate finance. Just to be very clear that when you're talking about carbon finance, we're talking about that in the carbon markets, and it's different, of course, from the carbon finance when you're looking at the likes of the GCF and whatnot. For you as a member of a SACCO, you're looking towards raising capital or raising some bit of finance to do these projects. There are different financing options or financing instruments. Now, the first one, what we call the forward purchase agreement, it's simply put, somebody is willing to buy your verified estimated emissions reductions of potential now before they have been actually been issued. We call that through the ex ante. Basically, if you're able to do a project and it's been assessed, in a document called a project design document, and the document says you're able to sequester 500,000 tons of greenhouse gases, then someone say, hey, I want to buy those emissions reduction now before they're issued. So the idea is for them to give you some bit of capital now before you're actually able to have this emissions reduction. It's one of the financing instruments has been deployed quite well, especially in the clean cooking sector and nature-based sector within the continent. Alternatively, if you have got adequate self-capital or own capital, you can always go for that particular option. Of course, there are the usual challenges of you might not have enough, and therefore it may not be adequate for you to do a full-fledged carbon project. We have a lot of philanthropies and grant programs around within the continent that have been able to support quite a bit of carbon projects ever since the early 2000s. So that is also another option. The last two options are a bit more tricky because then there'll be a consequence. In essence, for example, there's debt. Simply put, it's a loan. You want to do a project, it needs $2 million. You don't currently have it. You simply ask somebody to give you a sort of a loan. You agree on the interest, the return on investment, and of course you pay it back with the carbon credits. The other option is whereby somebody says, I will not give you a loan, but I will want to buy a stake within your project or a stake within your company, and that's what we call the direct equity. And of course, for each of these financing instruments, there is pros, there is cons. For you as a SACCO or for you as a will-be developer proponent, it's very important for you to look at what is the best solution for you. Now, that covers the overall basic, but how do we really get things moving in terms of developing the project? I'll be very top level here. Like, again, as I said, like any market, there must be buyers, there must be sellers, you must have your inspectorate and so forth and so forth. So within the ecosystem, we have got the developers like ourselves who develop the project for those who are not able to develop them. We also have the entities, the third-party entities who are responsible for making sure that all these projects are being done in the prescribed manner as per certain standards that have been set by what you call the carbon registries. We also have the people who buy these carbon credits. The buyers could either be corporations who are looking to offset, or in sometimes you could have the intermediaries like the brokers who are there to bridge the gap between the buyers and the sellers. In terms of registries, we have quite a number of registries currently in existence, in operation. There are over 10 carbon registries. The ones who are very popular within Africa is, of course, the UNFCCC through the CDM mechanism I've mentioned earlier. Vera, as you'll see, Vera has more than 70% of the share in Africa's carbon market ecosystem. There's also Gold Standard. There's also a very vibrant carbon registry with the unique set of standards and skills targeting stakeholder involvement. There's also Plan Vivo, very keen on nature-based projects. Those first four are the ones who have got a huge footprint within the ecosystem. On your right, you can see that when you're talking about carbon offset projects, it's not one, it's not two. Most of you, I think, maybe you might be familiar that plant growing trees is one way of getting carbon credits. That is just one of 170 different options. There's renewable energy, solar power plants are examples, electric mobilities are example, waste to energy, use of biodigesters, manure management in livestock ecosystem. All these are the various different types of carbon projects. For you as a SACCO, it's just a question of what are you able to do within your respective community. And remember, anything that is able to reduce or remove greenhouse gases can get you the carbon credits, but that's not enough. For example, number one, we need to look at the case of what we call the scale. Do you have enough scale for you to make sense? Because there are certain costs attached to a carbon project, and it's always good to make sure that the costs are never outweighing the benefits. But the most important tool that you always have to make sure, for example, is additionality. That which you're trying to do, will it have occurred on its own, or it wouldn't have happened without your intervention on carbon finance? Okay, for example, if you're talking about doing tree planting in a particular county or country, the question is, was the government intending to do tree planting? Was it about to happen, or it wouldn't have happened without intervention? If the answer is it's already intended to be happen to happen, or the government is already looking to do it, then you might have a hard case in proving additionality. In other words, carbon market operation is all about incentivizing or providing this opportunity to very unique projects that are doing what would ordinarily never been done by anyone. For example, in the case of Kenya, we know for a fact that the government of Kenya has always looked towards reducing the emission from the transport sector, but it's pretty expensive. So we have companies that are looking towards doing e-mobility, be it at the public transport sector like buses or otherwise, and for them they're eligible to get those carbon credits because the government will never have done it on their own, even within the fullness of time. So additionality is something very, very important. And just to quickly now wind up, how you do a carbon project, I want you to imagine a carbon project is no different from any other project you're looking at doing. For example, you might have the intention today, but don't say you're planting or growing trees in the month of October, and in the month of December, you're expecting carbon credits. No. It doesn't work like that. There's a very systematic process that starts with the feasibility assessment, your project design, and you have to look at the methodologies you're using. When I say methodology, I mean a scientific formula or scientific guideline that allows you to measure the emissions reduction from your carbon or mitigation project. Whether it's going to be tree planting, whether it's going to be a clean cooking project, there are certain standards or guidelines provided. So you have to make sure you design them as per that expectation. And just the same way in any project, you have like a sort of a project proposal document. Within the carbon market, you also have what you call the project design document, or if you like, PDD, that contains everything and anything about your project. That is literally what will be made public in the different carbon registries. So as anybody in the world, you may be doing a project in Tanzania, but somebody in Peru, somebody in Australia, somebody in Egypt is able to look at your project and make comments about it. Now, because you have used a particular standards to do the projects, design, a third-party auditor has to come and validate that indeed what you did is as per the expectation. As you can see, step number 4. Once that is found to be okay, then you proceed and the carbon standards are able to register a project and you start to walk the talk. You said you're going to grow 1 billion trees. Now go ahead and do it. You said you're going to distribute 100,000 electric bicycles. Go ahead and do it. And then we start to do what you call the monitoring and reporting during the implementation stage. Now, the beauty of a carbon project is that it can last for a pretty long time. There's this concept we call the crediting period, the duration within which you're allowed to create carbon credits. Depending on which registry, if it's a gold standard, it's usually 5 years. To mean you get your carbon project registered, you can do it for 5 years, and they'll allow you to renew it at most twice. So that means you have a project registered, you do your first 5 years, seek approval for renewal, another 5 years, seek approval for renewal, another 5 years. That's 15 years in totality. So the idea here is to make sure that one, you keep doing the good work of combating climate change, but also more importantly, have adequate time for you to recoup your investment, and of course, in the most sustainable way possible. In the case of the Vera ecosystem, the crediting period is 7 years, renewable twice. That means it can go up to 21 years. A good number of the nature-based projects have been known to go for as much as 30 plus years because, as you know, trees take time to grow and get to maturity and potential. So you're allowed to keep on generating credits within what you call the crediting period. And for every time you want your carbon credits, in step number 7, as you can see, you have it verified. Okay, you must make sure it's verified. Now, let's say 2 years into the first crediting period of 5 years, and you want your carbon credits, you do a report, the report gets verified, the credits gets issued. Then, as you can see, there's an arrow from number 8 to number 6 back again, because it means if you're doing a project in over 5 years crediting period and you have done the verification for credits in the year 2, you're still left with 3 years. So you go back again to keep on implementing until you exhaust. For those who will be buying your credits, of course, we'll be hoping they're going to be able to retire them. Now, remember, we're in the business of literally reducing air and selling air, if you like, in simple language. There's room for a lot of mischief, and that's why we've got organizations like the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market who come out with a lot of principles and guidelines to shape developers and tell them, hey, if you're looking to do a project, there are some of the principles that you should be able to follow and make sure you're doing something verifiable, something legitimate. So what you call the core carbon principles that covers a number of things. For example, are you effectively involving the community in your project, for example, is very, very important. So please feel free to interact with the ICVCM core carbon principles, even if you're thinking of doing the projects. As I mentioned, this thing has been running since as early as the late 90s, and there are a couple of trends I wish to share with you in the case of what's happening in Africa. I'm not sure if you can see the screen, but this will be shared with you. To date, by the time of making these slides the last week, we have about 2,100 plus carbon offset projects within Africa's voluntary carbon markets. And all of these projects in totality across the 54 countries are generating about 1.38 billion carbon credits, or they're able to sequester or remove or reduce 1.38 billion tons of greenhouse gases. That's what I'm saying. You can look at the most popular one, of course, is the likes of the most popular is the cook stoves, about 191 million tons of greenhouse gases per annum. You also have the likes of afforestation, reforestation, 31 million tons per annum. And there's some also that not so much, but they're also doing good impact. We have got Red Plus projects, we have got waste recycling projects. All these are the different kinds of projects running across the continent, and you'll be surprised that all these projects, the bulk of them, are done between Gold Standard and Vera. So interestingly, you'll find that in terms of numerical number of projects, the vast majority ones are, of course, are in the Gold Standard, but in terms of emissions reductions, those are the ones in the Vera. But it doesn't matter the registry. What really matters is, are you doing something that is really, really, truly verifiable? And as I mentioned, don't think that any idea is foreign to the continent. When you're talking about capturing methane from mines, somebody's doing it somewhere in Africa. We're talking about electric vehicles, somebody's doing it somewhere in Africa. If you're talking about landfill methane, someone is doing it in Africa. If you're talking about biochar, somebody's doing it in Africa. But just the same thing here. So there's an opportunity for you. If you're not started, there's an opportunity for everyone. Last but not least, of course, is pricing, because remember, when you capture or you remove or sequester the carbon, the greenhouse gases, it's not really money yet, it's just air. So you need to monetize it. So based on the last last year, that is in 2024, the average prices of the different mitigation activities were different, and of course there are different factors affecting the pricing. One is the type of project. Are you doing an avoidance, removal, or reduction? Removals like biochar tends to attract quite a bit, as you can see on the screen. And of course, things like that are avoidance, like renewable energy, fetch a far less price. I know my time is up. And last but not least is that besides climate change, there are these emerging concepts. Have you ever heard of plastic credits, for example? For every 1 ton of plastic that you collect and or recycle, you get 1 plastic credit that can go for a substantial sum of money. There's the use of remote sensing to oversee nature-based projects and whatnot. So allow me to stop there. The slides will be shared with all attendees, but the opportunity is there. It's just a question of what's your interest as a SACCO, what is the business opportunity as well from wherever you are, and the rest is just making sure you craft your name into the records of project developers or carbon offset projects within the continent. I'll stop there for now. I'm open to questions, or if there are any in the chat box, I'll also be responding. Otherwise, thank you. Back to you, Julius.
Thank you very much, Charles, for that. Colleagues, you can see Charles has really demystified the topic. And I think of interest to most of the stakeholders in this webinar today is maybe how to access financing so that you can be able to get started off with your carbon credit projects, and also how to go about development of the project. That he has already demystified, and I'm sure we are going to engage further when we will have the plenary session. So at this point, kindly allow me to welcome Mr. Vincent Mainga. Vincent, kindly take 10 minutes at most, so that once we finish the presentations, we can have time for plenary. You can ask all the questions. Kindly also continue putting your questions in the chat box. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Mary, and this team. My name is Vincent Mainga, the Country Director, Green Resources Initiative. And Green Resources Initiative is an organization based in Kenya, an NGO working in restoration and landscape restoration. It is also working on agroforestry, sustainable land management, and regenerative agriculture, and circular economy and sustainability. So it is my pleasure to be here, and this is the presentation. I'm going to speak about the role of microfinance institutions in terms of powering the carbon market and how they can tap into the emerging investments in carbon market. So we are going to have the role of microfinance institutions in economic development, which is quite critical because this economic development businesses are the ones that are fueling greenhouse gases. The guiding infrastructure for MFIs and SACCOs to decarbonize their operations. The global push for MFIs to adopt sustainable practices to reduce on their carbon and greenhouse gas footprint. Then strategic opportunities for MFIs and SACCOs to venture in carbon market projects. The rationale for microfinance institutions and SACCOs towards decarbonization strategies. And then the fundamental infrastructure for them to align their reporting so that they are able to become critical players in decarbonization. And then just a snapshot of some of the viable carbon projects that with emerging markets in Africa that MFIs can think about in terms of financial investment. Next slide, please. Yes, now, in terms of microfinance institutions and their role in economic development, this is an important component of powering economic development. Many of the businesses in African countries currently are supported by the banking and microfinance institutions and SACCOs. And they are acting as significant drivers and powering job creation, economic development, and also the realization of the sustainable development goals. And why is this important? Why is business in the relationship between the financial sector important? Because these are businesses that are contributing to some of the things that we are seeing in terms of greenhouse gases. Unsustainable business practices that are powered by microfinance institutions can either contribute to positive or negative, impact to the people and planet. If you look at this statistic, for example, the microfinance institutions are contributing to about 40% of the country's GDP. And this is huge. This is huge. It is a huge player in terms of economic development. And sustainable economic development can easily trigger contribution to greenhouse gases. Also very important, these are very important institutions in terms of also creating job opportunities for the youth and also job opportunities for other populations that have traditionally been underserved. So this network of businesses being done unsustainably, their contribution to greenhouse gases, we need to do business unusual. In doing business unusual, we need to think about sustainability. So fostering this economic development and businesses from MFIs with both negative and positive impact to the society, to the environment, requires us to think about greenhouse gases, how we can sustainably contribute to climate action and also to lowering the greenhouse gases. Next slide. What is the guiding infrastructure for MFIs and SACCOs to decarbonize their operations? Because MFIs and SACCOs will need to demonstrate that they're actually working towards decarbonization, and decarbonization is a process where it's a paradigm shift from unusual and sustainable business operations towards sustainability. Looking at the politics, I think we are currently at the readiness phase where the political landscape is ready. If you look at the policy landscape is ready globally and regionally. So what we need to do is to align our operations towards this international and regional and local landscape, policy landscape that are now pushing us as institutions towards sustainability. We have the evolution of these regulations, creating an enabling environment. We have the international finance and the reporting standards. Charles Wawela has talked about the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism that is aligning, the global countries towards climate ambition and action. We have the SDGs, we have the ESG framework, we have the carbon market, and we have the SBTIs that are committing corporates and institutions towards a net zero carbon strategy. Nationally, we have the national carbon market regulation. So in terms of policy, I can say Kenya is ready for investment on carbon projects. So looking at some of the, this way, yeah, there's something that I want to, the previous slide, yes. Looking at some of the key climate-related requirements that MFIs will need to align with themselves, we have this IFRS S2, which is about the climate-related disclosures. And right now, what the MFIs are required to do is to align their business operations towards reporting and disclosures with respect to Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And this is about, sustainability. It is coming home because if you look at IFTAC now requires that the disclosures in terms of financial and non-financial disclosures are meant for Scope 1, 2, and 3. And this has a timeline. By 2027, these financial institutions will be required to be, disclosing and reporting their sustainability strategy towards a net zero target. So when you look at the ESG frameworks that are also coming and the emerging regulations, the microfinance institutions will need to align their operations towards decarbonization. I think this is what I wanted to mention. So what are some of the strategic opportunities that MFIs and SACCOs can, position themselves to tap into the carbon market? One of the unique opportunities that we have as institutions in this sector is a huge customer base, huge client base, a broad network in terms of branches, strong boards that are able to drive policy change to align the operations towards ESG framework. They have a huge financial muscle that can be able to support carbon project investment and also development. Then they have good standards in terms of already they have good standards in terms of reporting and transparency, which is a key requirement for implementation, monitoring and reporting of carbon projects. So with this, strengths in place, I would say that microfinance institutions are carbon ready to be able to support investments in carbon markets. And there's a huge disconnect and gap between credible carbon credits and the supply and demand is huge. And Africa, I think, has positioned itself to be one of the continents that will be receiving investments in terms of carbon projects to closing this gap. So if these institutions are able to reinvent the wheel, align their operations towards decarbonization strategies, they are able to become key players in terms of developing carbon projects or even financing some of these investments that are coming, because it's a huge demand and traction, and Africa is a magnet for these carbon projects. So the rationale for MFIs and SACCOs towards digitization. What is the rationale? I think they need to be players. They need to be players in sustainable business operations towards climate ambition, and also the investment. They need to fund green financing investment projects. And looking at the global discussion and debate about ESG and decarbonization, most of the organizations are now moving from reporting numbers. Most of the financial institutions are now moving from reporting numbers to disclosures, both financial and non-financial. For non-financial reporting on impact, they'll be required to be reporting on their sustainability pathways, both for greenhouse gases and their impact in terms of how they are contributing towards emission reduction and the greenhouse gases. And they're also supporting compliance with the global market, the International Financial Reporting Standards, the GRIs and other ESG frameworks, SDGs. And this will actually enhance transparency in these institutions and also in the market, and also stakeholder confidence and diversification of their investment, contributing to impact to people and planet. And as I mentioned, that MFIs and SACCOs are already positioned to tap into this opportunity because of their infrastructure, their collective numbers, their technology, transparency systems. So they are already positioned themselves, and they only need to work towards sustainability reporting. And then if you look at some of the institutions that are driving financial movement, like banks, for example, they are already into sustainability. KCB, for example, is already raising a lot of their money, investments, and also diversification of their income from, adopting sustainable business and financial practices. Equity. If you look at Safaricom, most of these institutions and the Nairobi Securities Exchange, they are into sustainability. And for example, any corporate, any institution that is listed under the NSE, it means that you have now to align your operation towards sustainability. And that is for transparency, and you are able also to tap into the emerging carbon market business. Now, for you to move towards sustainability reporting and disclosures, then I think you need to understand some of the basic components for alignment. You need to have a policy, you need to have an ESG policy, you need to have an ESG governance structure. And this is quite critical for these institutions because this is actually the engine that drives all other components. When you have a board, a committee, the management, then you are able to work towards the policies. You're able to do your assessment in terms of the materiality assessment, both for financial and non-financial, and you are able to report, able to come up with KPIs and reports. So this is very important. And it is also important when you align your operations towards ESG reporting to be able to tap into the money that will be coming for carbon projects. And there are a number of carbon projects in Africa. There are different sectors. In the next slide, there are critical sectors that positioned themselves already for tapping into this, carbon finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincent. So colleagues, if you are following, the question that you should be asking yourself by the end of Vincent's presentation is your company doing ESG reporting? And if it is planning to do so, what framework are you following when you're doing ESG reporting? And if you're not doing it, do you need support in doing your ESG reporting? Thank you very much, Vincent. So at this point, we will have your questions at the end of the presentation. At this point now, I'd love to invite Brian Omenyi. Brian, welcome. Allow me to share your presentation.
Thank you, Mary. Am I audible?
You are audible.
Okay. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I know time is quite spent, so I will try and be as brief as possible. So my name is Brian Omenyi. I'm the Power Up campaign coordinator. So Mary, you can go to the next slide. So Power Up in a nutshell is a campaign that is running currently in Kenya, championing for access to clean cooking and productive uses of renewable energy. And the whole aim of the campaign is to leverage on the different global commitments and national commitments that have been made towards addressing climate change. So we're trying to use productive uses of renewable energy and clean cooking as avenues to which we can call upon those who have made these commitments to honor them up and be able to avail the resources that are required to address the climate crisis. And building on what the previous two presenters have said, I think Charles mentioned about set the scene about the Paris Agreement, which outlines the different commitments in terms of the compliance market for the different parties who have signed up to the UNFCCC to cut down emissions and limit it to 1.5 by 2050. This is going to help us to avoid the different climate change and negative impacts, especially the ones that we're experiencing. And this is where renewable energy comes in. So my topic is actually around renewable energy and the opportunities that are there. So basically, renewable energy is coming in to support the transition to cleaner and more sustainable development. And of course, the carbon market is supporting this in terms of providing then the financing that is required to transition us. And I've given an example of Kenya, which is really setting the good example within the continent and the region as one of those countries that have invested heavily on renewable energy resources. For instance, geothermal contributing to about 40% of our electricity mix, and hydro about 24%. So when you look at our grid, it's about 90% green. So which means the country we are doing well, but of course we have our challenges in terms of operations where the grid has to rely heavily on fossil fuels and other sectors. Next slide. So then when it comes to the renewable energy, I know most of these has also been shared in terms of what carbon markets are. So I won't really delve much on the first three bulletins. Of course, there's a big gap in terms of, for instance, in the region, we need over 250 billion annually to address climate change impacts by 2030. And therefore, carbon markets comes in one of the key strategies or avenues that we can be able to leverage on to be able to attract investments and to attract climate financing to enable us to address the climate change impacts that we are experiencing. Next slide. So some of the opportunities that are there within the renewable energy sector that we can be able to tap into, and especially for those who are in the businesses within the renewable energy sector, and also even for the local financial institutions. Some of the examples that we are sharing here are opportunities for you to be able to tap into and support end users and businesses to access financing for them to be able to scale up these solutions by leveraging on carbon markets, because they are either offsetting or avoiding the emissions, which then can be quantified and be able to benefit from the carbon credits. So one of them is mini grids. These are largely targeting off-grid and marginalized communities who do not have access to the grid. And therefore, they are vital for expanding the energy access, especially in the remote areas. And they come in handy because they displace traditional sources of energy for household use, for lighting, for instance, cooking and transport, by generating verifiable reductions that can then be able to generate carbon credits, and the carbon revenue can improve the project bankability, reduce tariffs, and attract blended finance. So from different sources, be it grants, be it loans, that can be able to be used by the businesses to scale up the solutions that they have. Next slide. The other sector that we can look at is the clean cooking sector, which I think was mentioned in Charles' presentation. This is also a very important market that is coming up. And it's a challenge and at the same time opportunity in Kenya, because over 70% of the population is still heavily depending on biomass. And therefore, the transition presents an opportunity for us to be able to come up with different cooking solutions that we can be able to leverage on. They are essentially in reducing indoor air pollution, they improve health and cut reliance on firewood, which of course affects, contributes to increased emissions. And we all know trees are also very important carbon sinks. So if we are able to avoid cutting down trees, we are going to increase carbon sequestration, which is addressing climate change. And that is a carbon market kind of avenue to generate some sources, and venturing into renewable and sustainable sources such as use of biogas, electric cooking, and improved cookstoves can then be able to help in addressing some of these challenges. And the reductions can be monetized through carbon markets, and they provide revenue to lower stove costs, support large-scale distribution, and sustain long-term cooking sources. So we have companies like BAN who are already having very active and benefiting greatly from the carbon credits because they are able to quantify the amount of carbon credits they're able to abate, and then they can be able to, the revenue they generate from this, they're able to subsidize the different products they're selling to end users, making them more affordable and supporting the transition that we are all aiming to achieve. Next slide. So the other sector, of course, is the productive uses of renewable energy. So we always say, of course, energy is not an end to itself. It's a means to different ends, and it's supporting socioeconomic development. And therefore, different sectors, like in the agricultural sector, is really driving increased the investments in terms of productive use. So we have those in the irrigation. Of course, we know Kenya heavily depends on rain-fed irrigation. So how do we support our farmers to transition to solar-powered irrigation, for instance, which is a more sustainable way of supporting the farmers to be able to water and irrigate their crops with the, of course, changing weather patterns. And of course, the other challenges that many of the farmers are grappling with is post-harvest losses. So how, for instance, do you support the farmers to prolong the shelf life of the produce? For instance, when it's plenty, so there is cold storage that is coming in, there is solar drying, and all that is enabling these farmers to be able to even add value to the different produce that they are producing, and enabling them to be able to benefit from the economic activities that they are engaging in. And next slide. The other sector that is growing quickly in Kenya is the e-mobility sector. I think we've seen the buses in Nairobi. We have seen small 14-seater matatus that are also taking up different companies venturing into electric vehicles. We've seen, of course, passenger vehicles, the small ones for Uber or for personal use, also being powered by electricity. You've seen Uber boarders who have really tapped into the market and gone the electric way. And all these are mechanisms or ways through which we can leverage within the sector to also address the aspects of climate change, but at the same time benefit from the carbon markets. So the e-mobility projects can, of course, monetize their emission reductions and generate and sell the carbon credits, therefore creating additional revenues. For instance, in Ethiopia, they passed a law, I think 2 years ago, banning the importation of diesel and petrol-powered vehicles. And the country is transitioning quickly to electric vehicles because they're also producing quite a lot of electricity, which is cheaper because they're also building a market and demand for the electricity they're generating. I think 2 weeks ago, we saw them launching their largest hydro dam in the continent, which is from a renewable resource and supporting this. And therefore, the different sectors that I've shared are opportunities for businesses to continue to invest in so that they can be able to scale up solutions. I know one of the challenges we face even within our coalition members is the different coalition members are complaining about accessing financing, especially from the local market. So this is an opportunity for the different financial institutions to tap into these sectors so that because there are opportunities for different financing, blended financing that they can tap into to support the businesses. And so as I also this is my final slide. There are different enablers and emerging trends and innovations that you can leverage on. Of course, the supporting regulations and the regulatory environment. We know we have the carbon markets regulations that came into force that are really setting the pace and the kind of regulatory environment for us to operate in a structured system. Of course, leveraging on blended financing. So carbon markets come in to supplement the different financing models that are there from grants, loans, equity, so that businesses have different avenues and sources that they can tap into to scale up the different solutions. We have the digital monitoring and reporting and verification, which are technologies like the Internet of Things, IoT and satellite imagery that are making crediting cheaper and more transparent. Of course, we know all the issues that we're having. I think I even saw a question on transparency on the chat. So all of these are being addressed. Then there's the aspect of demand signals and exploring partnerships with local financial institutions, which we are discussing about today, so that we are able to use carbon revenue as collateral and cash flow enhancers. So in a nutshell, the renewable energy market is quite ripe, and there are so many opportunities that businesses can leverage on to be able to not only conduct their businesses, but to be able to attract additional revenue to enable their businesses to scale up, but also opportunities for the local financial institutions to come in and be able to provide the necessary financing that is required to enable the industry to grow. Thank you, and I'll close it at that.
Thank you very much, Brian Omenyi, for highlighting those 5 main opportunities within the renewable energy space, where we can be able to leverage so that we can be able to venture into carbon market. At this point, now I want to welcome our last presenter, who is Vikash. As we wait for Vikash to come back, maybe we can be getting some of the questions from the audience. We have the first question. Charles Wawero, this question has been directed to you. Can you elaborate how to set up climate finance projects in agriculture, and how does the financing work to benefit farmers? Can you elaborate how to set up climate finance projects in agriculture, and how does the financing work to benefit farmers? Then there's another question. Don't you think the carbon credit markets still favor the carbon credit companies more than the last mile communities? Who are the initiators or custodians of these carbon projects? Maybe we can also have Vincent responding to that question. Charles, if you're still with us, you can take that question. The one on elaborating setting up carbon projects within agriculture.
Yeah, thanks. So when it comes to agriculture-based projects, when it comes to agriculture projects, there are different kinds of opportunities you can do in agriculture. So, for example, one, you can think of agriculture from an agroforestry perspective. This is where you are mixing your crop farming and, let's say, tree planting. It's very common in a number of coffee and tea estates where you have shade trees. grown next to the trees. So that's number one. And in that case, the carbon sequestration will be coming from the shade trees and not the coffee or the tea bushes. In that case, the second opportunity in the areas of agriculture is you can look at from the grassland soil organic carbon, whereby you are doing, let's say, rotational grazing. You're dividing your pastoral land into different paddocks to allow, and you're grazing the livestock from one paddock and then to the next, allowing the previous paddock to regenerate itself. So that is can be done from a soil organic carbon perspective. In fact, in Kenya, we have one of the largest grassland soil organic carbon projects in the Rift Valley region. That's the second one. You can also look at an agriculture project if you're into rice farming. What we call alternate wetting and drying for rice farms. In this case, what happens here is that when you're doing a rice cultivation, you usually do the flooding, but now when you do the flooding, you're creating this anaerobic environment, and there's methane, there's living organisms there, they lack oxygen, they die releasing methane. That's why it's always smelling methane within rice paddy fields. So what you then do in rice, you alternate the duration for flooding and no flooding, and you're able to quantify what is the amount of methane being reduced. This particular project is being done in Ghana, and it's actually an Article 6 project between Ghana and Switzerland. So that's another opportunity. Another opportunity can also be the case of a voucher, whereby you're taking agricultural waste, taking it through a pyrolysis machine, and then, of course, getting this black sort of substance, mix it with organic fertilizer, put back the soil to sequester carbon. If it's a lot of agricultural waste, you can do an avoided methane emissions by using the black soldier flies. It's there's a carbon project registered in Tanzania on this one. You can also consider livestock manure management, collect the manure, get biodigester. So there's a lot you can do in agriculture that tackle either the agricultural component directly, or it's a nexus between agriculture and energy. There's all sorts of possibilities again. So it depends what is your group doing. I know most smallholder farmers tend to do a lot of agroforestry. In fact, most of the agroforestry project tends to be an aggregation of thousands of farmers. Reason being, if you're a farmer with just 1 acre, you're looking to do agroforestry, it's not going to give you much. But when you aggregate these thousands of farmers, you've got something really, really huge. Bumitra, the Northern Rangelands, the Stiste, Solidaridad, all these are people who are doing aggregated agroforestry projects that will most likely be targeting smallholder farmers. I don't know if there's any other question or if that is okay.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. I think the other question was directed to Vincent, where they're asking, don't you think that the carbon credit market favors the carbon credit companies more than the last mile communities, who are the initiators or custodians of this carbon pool?
To Mary for that question. And the answer is, to me, yes, if we don't have the right legislation at country level. And right now, Kenya, I think we have the right policy legislation, but even stipulate the benefit sharing framework and arrangement for farmers and also for anybody who is implementing carbon projects. So I believe that the other thing is that this is a voluntary project, and with the free prior informed consent, the assumption is that these communities will, apart from that legislation, they are able to negotiate appropriately because they are important stakeholders. Now, looking at some of the carbon projects like the one that is being implemented in the coast by Wildlife Work, it has really benefited the community. Carbon projects take a long time, and benefits equal to the community also take a long time. So if you look at some of the case studies, I can say that there are many communities who are really, really benefiting. from the carbon project implementation. But the design and the benefit sharing need to be agreed before the implementation.
Vikash, if you're ready, maybe you can quickly rush through your presentation.
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Mary. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, I can hear you. Julius,
Okay.
please try. Oh, okay, thank you. Proceed.
Sure, thank you. So before I begin, I'll just quickly thank Charles, Vincent, and Brian for making the job easier for me. I mean, they have already covered a lot of areas in terms of the carbon finance and carbon market space. I'll just quickly talk about Microsafe Consulting, what we do in this space, and I'll also talk about what kind of challenges and opportunities could be there for MFIs and SACCOs under carbon finance and carbon markets. So, talking about Microsafe Consulting, I mean, we started our journey about 27 years ago where we focused on financial inclusion, financial and social inclusion. And right now we are covering about 12 sectors. And what we do basically is do technical assistance projects, do advisory, and do product design and innovations. And how do we do that is we do a very deep local research through local experts. So across the geographies that we work in, we actually work both in Asia and Africa, and we work with more than 90% local team members in all of the geographies and projects that we work in, and that's how we undertake the assignments that we do. Yeah, so you can move to the next slide quickly. Next. Yes, and I think, I mean, Charles, Vincent, and Brian has already talked about it. Carbon finance is basically a broader term, and carbon markets is a much smaller term. So carbon market is basically, and both of them talk about decarbonization basically. And for decarbonization, there could be a market-based mechanism and a non-market-based mechanism. So carbon markets are dealing only with the market-based mechanism, under which you have either a compliance market or a voluntary market, which we can talk about later. But what it does is basically look at either avoiding, reducing, or removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. And by doing so, it generates carbon credits, which can be traded under either a compliance or a voluntary market mechanism. And climate goals can be met for companies and countries, right? And if you look at how this whole mechanism work is actually, these are 4 steps, but under these 4 steps also there are many intermediate steps that we work on. So one is where people implement solutions which are basically looking at decarbonization solutions. It could be either a nature-based solution or a technology solutions, or it could be a combination of the both. But most of the times you'll see that these are the solutions which are available under carbon markets. Then when it is implemented, after that it is monitored, reported, and verified before a carbon credit can be issued, and then it can be transacted between a selling party and a buying party, right? So these are the 4 basic steps. But even before you start implementing an activity, we need to understand whether it is feasible and allowed to be considered as a carbon project or not. And then that's where the complexities come in. So some of the examples of the eligible activities, again, I mean, a lot of these has already been talked about. So I'll just focus on 2 elements. One is the nature-based solutions and the other one is the tech-based solutions. Under nature-based solutions, it could be anything related to agriculture, forestry, and any other land use systems, or any carbon sinks or carbon reductions in the natural landscape, which could be either over sea also, or for example, any other mechanism through you can actually sequester carbon under soil itself. And the second one is through technology. It could be energy efficiency, it could be renewable energy, it could be green mobility. So all of those will become part of the tech-based reduction, removal, or avoidance project. Can you move to the next slide, please? Yes. Now, again, I mean, why MFIs or SACCOs may be critical for carbon finance? I would say, I mean, if you look at typically right now, most of the carbon projects are implemented by NGOs, which are working in those specific areas related to climate change. It could be agriculture, forestry, or technology, or green mobility, or it could be implemented by a private sector partner who is an asset owner. How MFIs and SACCOs come into this whole picture is that they have a strength of working on financial inclusion. They have a strength of working with agricultural communities, farmers, beneficiaries, who could be a potential implementer for these greenhouse gas emission reduction activities, right? And that's how MFIs and SACCOs come into picture. And since they work with a large pool of these beneficiaries, and carbon projects do require a certain scale for this to become viable, and that's how by aggregating these beneficiaries, MFIs and SACCOs could play a very critical role in carbon finance, right? But I mean, to do that, they also need a lot of support, at least in the initial phases of getting into a carbon project, because it is important to understand whether the clientele or the customer base that the MFIs or the member base that the MFIs and the SACCOs have, whether they undertake any activity or have potential to undertake any activity which can qualify as a carbon market project or not. And that for that, they'll need an understanding of carbon markets, methodologies, and also various ways through which this can be ascertained, which is basically a feasibility assessment. Then in terms of managing the monitoring, reporting, verification, and managing the data sets for GHG emission reductions, again, there has to be both a digital as well as physical monitoring system put in place, which will require some kind of support to be provided to MFIs and SACCOs. And then also, given the broad understanding of the whole sector in terms of managing partnership, because any of the carbon projects cannot be implemented by a single entity alone. It has to have elements or partnership with various stakeholders, which includes the buyers, the validation and verification agencies, the registry, sometimes the implementing agency as an NGO. So these partnerships need to be managed. But the upside could be huge in terms of actually de-risking the climate impacts of some of the clientele or the customer base that they have, but also providing financial incentives in terms of new income stream, and also lowering the cost of capital for MFIs and SACCOs. Can we move to the next slide, please? Right. So, I mean, some of these I already talked about, which is basically for any new entity to enter, it is important that they become visible for buyers, project developers, and other implementers, that this could be a potential partner for them to actually undertake a carbon project. And that's where MFIs and SACCOs has to create a product offering in terms of what their customer base can undertake in terms of carbon projects, and then utilize the channels which are available to publicize it and make inroads into the carbon market space. So that's the first step, where they have to build credibility in terms of their own ability to undertake carbon projects. And then actually they have to build technical capacity to undertake carbon assignments. Then it will come to the financing, and then it will be towards capacity building and awareness generation. But the first two is critical for MFIs and SACCO to enter the carbon market space. And again, choosing between voluntary and the compliance market will depend on the geographies that SACCOs or MFIs are targeting. Next slide, please. Right. So again, if you look at the strengths which MFIs and SACCOs have for carbon finance, which actually comes from the fact that they have a huge aggregated base of customers or clients, on the basis of which they can build group activities, program of activities. They can also be a viable partner for compliance projects, which is a very large kind of carbon project in most of the cases. They also have something which is already dealing with financial products and services. And one of the challenges that we recently have seen in carbon markets are a robust financial structuring of carbon projects, especially if it is dealing with small scale farmers or beneficiaries in rural areas, because where their financial discipline becomes very, very important, because most of the carbon projects will be dealing with creating or maintaining assets, and maintaining those assets will require financial discipline. And MFIs and SACCOs have expertise in that area, and that is an opportunity area for them. The carbon revenues which can be generated from selling sales of carbon credits can again, generate a new revenue stream, which can actually reduce some of the portfolio risks which are associated with MFIs or customers of or members of SACCOs. Next slide, please. Right, the role of MSC is going to be throughout the process of implementing, monitoring, reporting, verification, and then issuance of credit and sales of credit. And how do we do it? Basically, through our technical teams, we are able to assess various types of activities associated with carbon projects. So, for example, if you would have seen the first few slides, we work across 12 sectors. So we have deep understanding in Asia and Africa, in working across agriculture and food system, nature-based solution systems, renewable energy, financial sectors. So through understanding of these sectors and the partnerships that we have within academia, the civil society, the governments, we also understand the regulatory landscape better, and that's where we can help MFIs, SACCOs, or any new entrant into carbon market in doing a feasibility or program design. Now, the second element that we can support is related to MRV, which is both physical as well as digital. So physical MRV is putting in place system and processes, creating questionnaires, and then actually looking at how do we undertake these assessment and look at the quality of assessment, because the credibility of any carbon project depends on robust MRV frameworks. So doing the physical monitoring part right, and then also looking at the digital monitoring part, where we can create digital solutions or digital MRV platform for implementers to adopt and monitor the project outcomes. The third area that MicroSafe can support is in terms of designing the financial structure of projects. And this we have done across customer segments and across sectors in the past. And in carbon markets also, if MFIs, SACCOs, and smallholders have to access a larger market share, a better financial structuring is what is required. Lastly, I would say as an ecosystem player, we can work across different segments within carbon markets, right from buyers to registries, VVBs, and support in terms of the whole value chain of carbon credit projects. Right. So, if we talk about the portfolio that the MFIs and SACCOs have, and how they can reach towards carbon revenues, these are the 5 steps that they can take look at. One is looking at their own portfolios and screening whether they have an opportunity to enter carbon market. Second is looking at whether they have scale or not. If they can get to that scale, they can structure a carbon project. Once the carbon project is structured, then it will get to MRV and digital data systems management space, which can lead to actually issuance of credit, where a partnership building and financing of those projects will come into the picture. And then ultimately it will be carbon sales transactions and revenue sharing. So these are the pathways through which portfolios can actually look at generating carbon revenues. Now, last slide is where actually we are looking for the participants to come in and actually reach out to either the MicroSafe team or reach out to other panelists to understand more about what kind of opportunities are there in this space. And we are going to reach out to attendees of this webinar so that we are able to understand their own interest and opportunities for entering into carbon markets. Then we can also look at how do we open up data and portfolios so that the scoping of the carbon market opportunities can be done. The third stage would be launching pilots and then testing models with the interested parties. And then finally, then looking at how do we build carbon literacy and capacity building, and then getting into carbon market readiness phase. So it's going to be a journey, but it's something which we can build together. And these are some of the resources that you can look at and reach out to us. I'm sure after the webinar gets over, this will be made available to all the attendees, and you can learn more about that. So all of these presentations are very exhaustive. It will be useful to go through them. And if you have any questions, please do reach out to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vikash, for taking us through the role of MSC in supporting SACCOs and MFIs in the carbon market project. Yeah, so at this point, I know we have quite a number of questions, and we will be responding to them as, again, we are very tight of time. I would like to borrow at least 5 more of your minutes. And Brian Omenyi, if you're still there, kindly, you can share the link where we can be able to do the poll. Brian, you can post the link or maybe the QR code in the chat, and then we can continue responding. Yes, Brian has put the link in the chat. So the moment you click the link, you click on that link, you should be able to just answer. It's only one question. It's only one question, and it goes. It is asking. Opening mine. It will only take you like 2 seconds. Yeah, mine from the phone is already up, and the question is asking, what are your support needs within the carbon finance sector? What are your support needs within the carbon finance sector? If you use your phone, if you use your laptop, you click on the link, just type that answer there. And as you type, we can proceed with the next of the questions. Brian, there was a last question here that was directed to you. And someone was asking, what is the place of green microfinance in the carbon market? What are the opportunities of rural communities? For example, in Marsabit County, Kenya, there are some solar mini grids set up through donor funding in many locations. Can the local communities earn carbon credits from such initiatives? Brian Omenyi, this was your question.
Thank you, Mary. Yes. So I think one of the things is Charles shared the criteria for which you can be able to, a project can be eligible for you to be able to benefit from carbon credits. And yeah, so just to answer the question directly, yes, the local community can be able to potentially benefit from the carbon credits. But one, if it was funded by a local, like a donor, then they need to identify who is the asset owner, or if the community is the one that is managing, then they need to get into that, identify the one who financed the project, who, of course, there are things that have to be considered, who owns the land, for instance, where the project is situated at, who is managing the project. And then from there, the different steps in terms of the eligibility have to be considered for the community to be able to benefit. So yeah, it's possible the community can be able to benefit, but there are different steps that have to be followed. And one of the things is the climate regulations provide for that. Sorry, is somebody speaking? There's a background echo I can hear. Mary, was I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Proceed.
Yeah. So if the mini grid was donor funded, the community can be able to do that if they follow the right steps, so that they can be able to map out the different things that I've listed, and also following the steps that Charles shared, they can be able to follow the different steps, be able to generate and benefit from the carbon credits.
Thank you, Brian. Colleagues, I hope you're still answering the question through by clicking the link that was shared. Julius, you can ask the last question, then we wind up.
Thank you so much, Brian and the other panelists for such insightful discussion. So this is for you, Vikash. That was a strong set of points from you, and across Africa and beyond, and even Asia. MFIs and SACCOs are already financing these activities like clean energy, agroforestry, irrigation, waste solutions, and climate smart agriculture. And for this, these portfolios are not yet structured to generate carbon credits. Vikash, in the next few months or few months, for example, what do you see as the most practical and realistic pathway that these MFIs and SACCOs can plug into carbon finance?
Thank you, Julius. And I think you rightly mentioned, I mean, most of the
Vikash,
activities.
you're on mute.
Can you hear me now? Am I audible?
We can't hear you.
No, we can hear from our end. Maybe Julius, it's you.
We can hear from our end.
Yes. Oh, thanks. Thanks. So what I'm saying is, so in terms of if I look at the concrete steps that MFIs and SACCOs can take, because right now, if we look at the portfolios of these entities, financial inclusion entities or SACCOs, most of the clients, partners, members are implementing activities which can be termed as uh, greenhouse gas emission reduction activities. However, the challenge is most of this is not aggregated and this is not designed in a way which can make it eligible under carbon projects. So the first step I would say is to have a screening done for the client base or membership base to understand the type of activities that they undertake for either their livelihoods or for any other development outcomes. And wherever we see large enough opportunities, that's an area where it can be explored whether that can be designed as a carbon project and or not as a next step. So, for example, if an MFI has a client base which looks at clean cooking as a large problem and they're dealing with clean cooking solutions, then that could be an area where we can explore whether a carbon project can be structured or not. Once that structure or potential or scoping is done, the next set of steps becomes easier, comparatively easier, because then you have a landscape of actors. It could be a project developer, it could be a technology provider, it could be a carbon investors that the MFIs and SACCOs can reach out to get into a partnership and then can build a project. So I would say two steps: develop own understanding of carbon projects by looking at some of the resources which were shared during the webinar today or reading some of the information which might be available publicly. And then second, looking at their own portfolios, screening that to understand whether there is a opportunity to get into carbon markets or not. While keeping in mind that since it is a market-based mechanism, it will also have certain risk elements involved with that, and that needs to be managed when they go and implement it.
Thank you very much, Vikash. So I think, colleagues, at this time now, we need to close because time is far much gone. So let me conclude by saying that we've had very good insights from the panelists who have shared. You've also raised very good comments and questions through the chat box. So we are going to share the recording so that those that did not manage to log in, they will be able to listen and maybe later on share their insights as well. So we are going to reach out and discuss the possibility of having more technical clinics within the various areas of support that you've responded through the question that we put in the slido.com. So also kindly reach us through our email. When you go to the website, you should be able to see our details and also the email that we're going to reach through to you. You should be able to get back to us. So we'll be having more webinars to stay informed about carbon market issues in Africa. So thank you very much for your time and participation in the webinar. Thank you again to our panelists who are very knowledgeable within our topic of discussion. So till next time, bye-bye. Thank you.